If you think you can learn everything you need to learn to really attract attention in this world on social media, staying on the surface, I think you have another thing coming. No punches pulled on this episode of 8-Second Rule. This is 8-Second Rule, the podcast about attention-based marketing where we talk about getting, holding on to, and developing the attention of your ideal audience. You've got 8 seconds. What are you going to do with it? Hey, I am Mark R. Morris Jr. coming to you live from my bat cave, the basement that I have not refinished yet in the house that I am renovating. But I'm here in Oklahoma City under a couple of inches of snow, so it's a great day to be inside. And I am nice and toasty. The heater's in a closet right next to me. I did actually some soundproofing, so hopefully you will notice a little bit of an increase in sound quality. I'm going to be working on that as time goes by. Yes, I do know what the technical problems with my podcast are. I have produced things at a much higher level in the past. I'm just focusing on content this time around. So I am Mark R. Morris Jr. Like I said, I am the bull rider of copywriting. If you don't know what that means, find me on LinkedIn. Please connect with me over there. Read my about section. You'll understand. It's about cowboys. It's about staying on top of the bull for 8 seconds to score in a rodeo. It's about basketball players. It's about the time they have to get the ball from underneath their basket to the half-court line before the ref turns it back over to the other team. All right? It's about marketing and how little time you have to catch someone's attention before they wander off to another page. Okay, so today on 8-Second Rule, we are going to talk about going down the rabbit hole. I hope you're ready. One of my favorite authors when I was young, and still to this day, I always loved the British authors. I loved Dickens. I loved Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan. And I also love Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland. And so the idea of going down the rabbit hole, which has been, presented in pop culture so many times, we talk about chasing rabbits, and that comes directly from Alice in Wonderland because she actually chases after a white rabbit, goes down a hole, and finds herself in an alternate universe, essentially. So if you've never read it or you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm sorry, I don't know where you've been, but you need to find out because it's a really fun story. If you are a reader, please select Lewis Carroll's original novel and check it out that way because he was much better at telling it than anyone else has been. But here's my concept on talking about this today. A lot of times I see on LinkedIn, I see these people who are influencers and they've got huge amounts of engagement. And they are all hat and no cattle, all right? This is a Texas term that means you look like a rancher, you talk like a rancher, you got no ranch, all right? You're out there, you're calling yourself sassy somebody, and you think your content is really, really all that, and you're not digging below the surface. You're repeating the same pablum that everybody else gives to their audience, okay? I'm calling you out right now. I know you've got a bigger, fatter bank account than me. I don't care. You're boring. Okay, it's time for you to go down the rabbit hole. And I'm going to explain what I mean on that here in just a minute. One of the things that I learned to do early on after our television set died and I started reading is think for myself. Of course, it was, the late 1970s when I was growing up in the early 80s. And so, there wasn't as much competition for thought, I think, as there is now, at least not as invasive, because we didn't carry it around with us in our pockets. I mean, yeah, some people had those little portable televisions, even on a watch, but they weren't very practical. You could barely get like 3 stations. It was super grainy. The audio was bad. So you might use it to keep up with your favorite sports team, but you certainly weren't going to watch any blockbuster movies on it or anything like that. And YouTube didn't exist. So if you wanted to pick up someone else's thoughts, you had to do it in a different way, and that was going to the library. And a library is a perfect example of a rabbit hole. Now, listen, YouTube can be the same way, and it's really grown on me over the years. But getting into a deep vein of someone else's thoughts gives you an opportunity to compare and contrast them with your own and to come to your own conclusions. Sometimes the short format world that we live in today doesn't really give us much opportunity to do much thinking. So I think that it kind of stunts us in a way, and it makes it more difficult for us to actually have our own thoughts. We tend to want to glom onto one party or another. And I don't just mean politically, I mean religiously, I mean philosophically, I mean in the sports we like, in the media we like. We feel like we have to have a brand. We feel like we have to be on a team. We feel like we need to like a certain genre of something or a certain flavor or color. And honestly, that is so artificial. If that's not what you like, don't keep pretending. But here's the other part of it. If you find what you like, go deep. If you just find something you're curious about, go deep. Listen to me. Follow the links at the end of that article. Okay? Follow the link to read more of that person's profile, more of their posts. Follow the link to read more of their blog posts. Go get their audiobook. Dig in. You find a topic that you find interesting. I don't care if it's UFOs. Go after it. Why do I say any of this? Well, I'll tell you something that I discovered in my probably mid-20s, which was things that you learn in life are connected like a web. A spider sits on a specific thread of her web, and she waits for something to hit the web and struggle. Why? Well, everything out there is connected, but she knows which ones are sticky and which ones are not. And she can run along the ones that are not, and she feels that tension when something happens, even if she's dead asleep. Well, in the mind, everything that you learn is connected to everything else. You are one person. It is one mind. It is one brain. People who want to divide themselves up, who talk about ideas like compartmentalization, which many psychiatrists and psychologists have determined is really not a very healthy tool. They don't understand that everything that they do is connected. Their work is connected to their faith. Their faith is connected to how they manage their family. Their family is connected to how they operate with other people in the world. Every experience and relationship and piece of knowledge that you earn goes into the same brain. Okay. And what it is doing is building autonomic responses that allow you to operate every day really without thinking. You're making most decisions in an instant based on your past experience. So how do you vary this? Because you guys are trying to be creative, right? Listen to me. If you want to learn how to have more creative ideas, stay tuned because I'm going to show you. Hi guys, this is Mark Morris, the copy bull writer from 8 Seconds Rule. And I just want to start off by telling you about Anchor. Anchor.fm. I found this site a couple of years ago, and it is the simplest and easiest way to start a podcast that I know of today. You can do it straight from your smartphone. You don't need anything but their app. It's free. They have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast. You can even add music, add buffers, all of those things right here on the site. It doesn't cost anything to host it. You can start as many as you want. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it's heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, many more, and you make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Okay, if all you ever did was eat plain yogurt, you never had anything else, and then someone asked you to come up with a recipe. You hear that silence? That's what you would have to offer. Okay? Let's say that all you ever do is watch sports, and then someone says something that you feel like you have an opinion about in politics, but you have never taken the time to educate yourself. What are you going to say? More nothing. Okay, so people say things like, I'm an agnostic, I'm an atheist, who have never really explored the concept of whether there ever was a God. They got nothing to say on the subject, right? It's easier for them to say, look, I see that people who are based in religion are jerks. I don't want to be a jerk, so therefore I'm an atheist. Well, are you? Okay, that's fine. I don't care. I have no dog in the fight. Listen, if you hear me talking about religion, understand I'm coming from a different perspective than most. I'm a universalist. I think we all win in the end. I'm not going to discuss it here, but that's what I think. So, but those things should matter to you on some level. You should have some ideas about how the world works. You should have some opinions about how things are and how you want them to be. If you don't, how will you ever know what you want your ideal life to be? You're going to accept someone else's version of what it should be. So you must have a plethora of ideas coming into your life, and they need to be on varied topics. Listen to me. You don't know what all you're interested in. I promise you don't. You think you do, but you don't. If you begin to explore with a little bit of an open mind, you will find all kinds of concepts that are so fascinating. Okay, so I'm going to send you down one rabbit hole just for fun. I'm going to send you to go and find, if you've never watched it, a little film called What the Bleep Do We Know? It is about quantum mechanics and how the mind works and kind of the power of attraction, but don't worry about that. Just go watch it, see what you think, see if it doesn't open up some new ideas for you if you've never explored anything that esoteric before. All right? Or just do this. The next time you log into Netflix, instead of going straight to horror or comedy or, chick lit or rom-com, go look at the documentaries. Pick one about something that you would find interesting. Most of them are pretty short. Sit and watch it. Just force yourself to do it. You may be surprised at what you find out. Go down the rabbit hole. When you're finished with that, if you were interested in that topic, then go find somebody who writes about it. Read a little bit. Go watch some videos on YouTube. Find out more. Look at it. Develop an interest in life. Don't walk through life just thinking, oh, I'm going to make some money and I'm going to travel. I'm going to meet the right guy or girl or non-binary human being and we're going to have a wonderful life, and either we're going to build our own children or not have children at all or adopt somebody else's. That's all great. But what about you? What are you thinking? What are your thoughts? Are there any rabbit holes in your mind? Because if there are not, it's going to be very difficult for you to create content. Why do I say that? I've already explained myself. If all you eat is plain yogurt, how many recipes are you going to write? Okay, so that's the thing. If you've never explored anything outside of what you're doing in marketing or sales or development of new products and ideas, then what you're doing, how do you know? You have no clue. You've not experimented with anything in life. All right, now I'm not necessarily talking about taking some big drug trip or getting, go find a sex club or something. There are things in life that definitely have inherent risk and danger. I'm not telling you not to do those things if you're a grown adult and everyone's consenting, but I'm saying you need to find a variety of experience in life, and if you don't, then don't blame anyone but yourself when you have a hard time creating new content. When Alice fell down the rabbit hole, she found that everything was upside down, right? She found that things that made sense in what she thought was the real world, of course she was a child, so her basic understanding was very limited, but didn't make sense here. Things were weird. Okay, she meets a caterpillar that smokes a hookah. All kinds of talking animals and playing cards that are animated and all of this sort of stuff that's just very, very strange, right? And in the end, she realizes it's all in her imagination. But she doesn't know that in the beginning. And it challenges her perception of reality. It makes her think a little bit differently about who she is, so that when she comes out of this experience, this rabbit hole experience, she is not the same girl that she was before. Okay? And we know this because there are subsequent novels in which Alice takes other adventures into Wonderland. And she has a much more sophisticated view of what's going on there and what should be going on there. Okay? She starts to develop her own view of the world and her own view of justice and how things should be, and not just adopting that was, taught to her before she went down the rabbit hole the first time. So this is what the rabbit hole experience does for you. It changes you, okay? It's like The Matrix. If you've ever watched the movies, yeah, I know. It's not the best science fiction in the world. It isn't the best written. It isn't the best acted. But the ideas that are in it can be pretty powerful if you've never really explored them before. The movie Inception is another one that kind of does that. Limitless is another one that's kind of interesting. They pose questions about what if a human being could be this way? What if life were more like this? And asking those kinds of questions, guys, that's where good content comes from. What if you could generate 100,000 views of every single post that you ever put on LinkedIn? I'm being quiet so I can listen. I hear the wheels turning in your head. Yeah. Do you see? Okay, now I'm smelling some smoke. Somebody's burning out. Okay, quit thinking. It's okay. It's all right. It's all right. You need some practice. Okay, come back. Now, I'm kidding, of course. But listen, you need to ask these kinds of questions. One of the questions that I learned to ask a couple of years ago that really helped me with this was this one. Are you ready? I'm going to tell you where I found it first. Okay, but you know what? Let me just tell this whole story. But before I do that, I want to say, you've got to learn to be more inquisitive. You really do. If you want to attract attention to yourself, being inquisitive will make you interesting because you will learn all sorts of things about all sorts of people. I can carry on a conversation with almost anyone. Why is that? Because I find people and what they do with their lives very intriguing, very interesting, especially if it's different from me. I don't care if they are a white trash redneck hillbilly living in a trailer somewhere, or the King of England, right? It doesn't matter to me. They are not the same as me. And so there's something I can learn by looking into their experience and following it. So I'm going to tell you this story that's going to help you to maybe start to see things differently in just a minute. Okay, so I was getting ready to go to Mexico with my wife, who works for a company called Pure Romance. And yes, that is a company that sells bedroom products and bath and beauty products. Yeah, she does in-home parties. It's all for ladies. She has a lot of fun. She's on the board of directors. Her team sells about $500,000 worth of product a year. And this year in particular has been really good for them. But normally, we go on incentive trips because she's pretty successful at what she does. Well, one of the first ones that we went on was to Cancun, Mexico. And so I was going to need a passport for the first time in my life because the last time I went to Mexico, you didn't need it. You just needed, some kind of ID. And so I went to get my passport and I realized that I was going to have to travel into one of the 7 circles of hell, which is a United States Postal Service office. And I can tell stories about me and the Postal Service and the problems we've had at some point in the future, or maybe over on Story Junkie, but not today. Anyway, I find post offices depressing. Generally, the people there are angry and rude. The mood is somber. It's just not a fun place to be. And this particular post office that does passports in Oklahoma City is directly across from an empty spot that used to be the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, where Timothy McVeigh set off a bomb and killed 169 people. So it's really not a place that I want to ever spend a lot of time. But I walked in and immediately I felt a difference. They had painted the walls a nice shade. I don't even remember what the color was. They'd kind of either changed out the bulbs in the fluorescent lighting or gotten some new lighting altogether. The tile floor had some color to it. It was not the same gray stomach of the government kind of building that I usually feel like I'm walking into when I walk into a post office. And the people behind the counter, they were actually wearing a little bit of color. They were smiling. They seemed to enjoy their job. It was weird to me. And the line for the passport photo was short. I was behind one family of immigrants that were getting some documents done, and it was really cool. And they talked to me a little bit, and I was happy to meet them. And then I look up over the door where everyone's hopes and dreams go to be crushed by the U.S. Postal Service in the form of packages, because that's what they do with your packages. And over the door that leads into this torture chamber for mail and consumable goods was a sign. And the sign said, "What's the best that could happen?" And I had to read it again. And then I had to read it a third time because I initially thought I was completely wrong. And the sign said, "What's the worst that could happen?" Because that's the question that we always ask ourselves, isn't it? So this question stuck with me, and I started asking it in my life. What's the best that could happen? And I started imagining different outcomes. And do you know that has changed my attitude in so many circumstances of life? For example, what's the best that could happen with this podcast? Well, I've already gotten 250 listens out of 10 days. I put up 14 episodes and lots of people seem to be enjoying it. I'm getting tons of positive feedback and it seems to be growing. So the best that could happen, is I could have 1 million listeners by the end of the month. I don't know that that's going to happen, but I can imagine it happening. And guess what? If I act like I'm going to get 1 million listeners by the end of the month, I will probably get more listeners than I would if I was just, what's the worst that could happen? My podcast could really suck and nobody could listen to it. And then I could go home and, do something else, right? But by asking a different question, guys, guess what you get? A different answer, even from inside your own head. Instead of getting the same answer off the shelf and bringing it to you, your autonomic system will actually bring you a new answer. There's lots of other books in your library that you've never even checked out up there. There's lots of experiences that you've completely forgotten about or that you overlook and they don't seem important, but they're all connected. This is where the web analogy that I told you about comes in, right? So when you learn new things and you go down a rabbit hole and learn all kinds of interesting, weird stuff, everything changes. You are reorganizing your library because now you recognize that experience that your grandmother had is probably connected to the experience that this best friend of yours had over here. And that agency that did this probably has a connection to that company over there. And you know what I'm saying? You start to see connections. Now, I'm not saying you need to become a conspiracy theorist, although if you're going to, please watch the Mel Gibson movie Conspiracy Theory, because this line that he delivers in that movie and the fact that the ending, the conspiracy is so much more vast and crazy than he could ever have imagined it was, right? Is this, he says, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you, okay? So it's just the idea that things are connected in life. And I am not talking about political end of things or that the number of the beast or the frickin' Antichrist or any of that mess or Q or I don't know, aliens seeding the planet. Whatever your favorite theory is, it's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about normal, everyday information that connects to other normal, everyday information inside your brain and makes all of it more usable. And you will build more of this when you go down the rabbit hole. So let's say you have gone down the rabbit hole in an Epicurean way. You are curious about food and you want to try new things, right? Now, when someone asks you for a recipe, you've just been to the latest Indian restaurant and yesterday for lunch you had some fresh sushi and you're starting to make your own sushi, and you went to a steakhouse a week ago and you ordered out from a Mexican place and you tried Thai food, and you see what I'm saying? Okay. You've sampled some different things. You've gone to the grocery store and that vegetable that's curious looking, you picked it up and you put it into your basket and you took it home and you looked it up on the internet and you cooked it and you hated it. That's okay. You learned something. You don't like eggplant. It's cool. Don't worry about it. Lots of people don't like eggplant. But what I'm saying is you now have a wealth of experience. And when someone mentions eggplant, you can't go, I've never tried eggplant. All I eat is plain yogurt. And the conversation's over. All right? So by doing this, what you do is you give yourself a vocabulary for creating more new ideas. You have now established that you have all of these additional stories you can tell. You have all of these resources, and some of them were connected to other resources in your brain. It's awakened things in you that you didn't even remember you thought or felt or knew. Go down the rabbit hole. Listen, people, I've got to get off because I have an interview for another episode coming up here in just a few minutes. But I want to encourage you today to go down the rabbit hole. And listen, your free tool for the day, you can get a free month of Audible, and then you can cancel it. You don't ever have to use it again. But with it, you'll get a couple of free books. Pick something you wouldn't normally pick. Go down a rabbit hole, okay? Or if you're really curious, you can read one of my books. You can find them over on payhip.com. If you'd ever like to reach me, you can get to me at markrmorris2@gmail.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at Mark R. Morris Jr. If you look anywhere online for Mark R. Morris Jr. or one word, Mark R. Morris, and the number 2 at the end of that, you will find my work. So if you want to go down a rabbit hole, I've probably opened some up and you can crawl inside with me. All right, guys, listen, we've got 8 seconds. What are you going to do with them?